Let's get you a check on oil prices right now as well, as we always do. And in terms of overall market sentiment and direction here, we are looking at WTI in positive territory, up by 0.4, but still sub 80 USD. Brent at 83.49, down 0.08%. Sarah Vakhshouri is here. She's the founder and president of SVB Energy International, joining us with more on the outlook. And Sarah, I thought we could kick it off with this latest report conducted by the US Federal Reserve into the impact of OPEC communications on market stability. This is something that is frequently spoken about in the oil and OPEC community. So I want your take on it. Give me some context into the report, why this research was conducted and its overall methodology.
Well, Dan, this is a great question to start with. This is a very large report, almost 59 pages, and very specifically with a very thorough methodology looking into OPEC's messaging. And it's not just the OPEC's written messaging, but also it looks into the signalings of OPEC and oral messaging by the OPEC. Something that we have to think about and don't forget is that it's not just the human being, the traders and the market that are sensitive to these messages, but also algorithm, because most of the price forecasts and forecasting models are done with algorithm. So this model is actually looking into all those sentiments.
It was fascinating as well, and the reason I wanted to ask you about it is because the report also specifically highlights some key issues here, major challenges like COVID, the Russia-Ukraine war, even conflicts in the Red Sea. And the ultimate conclusion was that the current messaging strategy that OPEC has is good for market stability. But I want your take. What is the overall impact of OPEC messaging for investors? Because another key element of this research was based on the credibility of some of these communications. So is it clear that investors make decisions based on OPEC messaging alone rather than just a communication of the fundamentals from these key leaders?
Well, you know, the thing is that the messaging is, of course, based on the strategy. So when we're talking about the credibility, we're talking about the strategy. But what is important is that the market sentiment and the investors, traders, everybody, obviously, they look beyond the statements and strategies that have been announced and look into those signalings. And yes, investors look into that. You mentioned, for instance, COVID. If you look at the COVID, OPEC has been trying to, at the time of extreme uncertainty for the demand side, they were trying to give at least certainty on the supply side to the market by coming up with preemptive measures by the three principles that His Royal Highness Saudi Energy Minister is always talking about it: preemptive, precautious, and proactive. They were coming up with advanced messaging, advanced decisions that would help the investors, because investors need certainty to invest in the market. And when it's extreme volatility, extreme uncertainty, they can't. And in fact, this report argues that OPEC's messaging helped with the reducing the volatility, which means perfect ambience and environment for investors and market stability. It's important then to consider that this is fundamental to energy security. So all of this indicates that OPEC decisions, strategy, but also messaging has been all correlated into increasing the global energy security.
With the goal of protecting and promoting market stability. And Sarah, just on another point here, the report also highlights the importance of effective data when it comes to making overall production decisions. But one of the clear concerns I think we've seen in the market and in this community over the last couple of years is a widening division between OPEC and the IEA on the numbers. And this all really came to the fore just last week with Bob McNally, for example, saying that the IEA has become too politicized in some of its number and decision making. What's your take on that and the gap that we see between OPEC and the IEA now? This is something that OPEC leaders are becoming increasingly vocal about.
And something that in economy for any commodity is important is the dominant narrative or the narrative in the market. And the narrative could kind of shape the future. So IEA's narrative before COVID started with this idea that we're going to have an oversupply because of the growth of shale, because of shale revolution, and we're going to have very quickly a peak demand because of environmental measures. Also, they advocated for zero investment in fossil fuel. So what this as a consequence happen is obviously we talked about investors. Investors will not put their money somewhere that they think there's going to be an oversupply and a lack of demand. What happened, few things, COVID happened, shale production hit, and it didn't go as much as IEA was expecting. But also the investors started to reduce and diverting their investments from fossil fuels for different reasons, the expectations of IEA and recommendations of IEA from both expectations on demand, supply, and also recommendations. So what happened is that what we saw is that when the COVID recovery happened, we had a healthy growth of demand, but supply could not catch up. And then adding the war between Russia and Ukraine and all those geopolitical concerns, we saw that the chaos, the shortage in the market. So that narrative is very important. And also IEA constantly corrects and makes revisions, adjusts its revisions to the realities of the market. But those preemptive decisions that they are announcing to the market, like this report perfectly did the analysis, is going to have an impact on volatilities in the market, on decisions in the market, and ultimately on actual supply and demand. So if investors are expecting, like for instance, last year, everybody was expecting that this year we are going to have a recession. The demand expectation was not realistic, but we saw OPEC demand being very high. Even like ministers at OPEC, particularly Saudi energy minister, they were warning that demand is not going to be as expected in the market so low because of recession. Now we're in 2024. Everybody is saying that we're having a healthy demand growth, and there's not going to be that much of hit on the demand. This is the same story at the Russia-Ukraine war. EIA came up with this idea that 3 million barrels of oil from Russia is going to be misplaced. What happened as a consequence of that decision? We had countries like United States starting releasing their strategic petroleum reserve. But what was OPEC's message at that time? We had OPEC's late secretary, His Excellency Barkindo, coming up and saying that there is no substitute for Russian oil, so it's not going to be misplaced at this level. So yes, there is discrepancy,
right.
but that discrepancy could have impact on decisions in the market and future actual fundamentals.